Welcome to The Way Home with Laura Smith, the show that brings you wonderful guests, helpful advice, and uplifting stories. The Way Home. Live inspired. Here's your host, Laura Smith.
There's one thing that we all do, whether we know it or not, and whether we do it consciously or not, we are always listening and listening to each other, and to varying degrees, listening well or maybe not so well, listening socially, culturally, all sorts of different ways. This was brought to my attention because of a dear friend of mine from grade school, and she posted something on Facebook that I thought looked absolutely fascinating. A friend of hers from university was writing a beautiful new book, and I fell in love with the title. Only that's all it took to grab me to say, I want to interview this woman. The name of the book is Kiku, The Japanese Art of Good Listening, and it is by Dr. Haru Yamada. And it is she is a social linguistics researcher and writer. She has her PhD from Georgetown University, and she has written a book that if you want to learn every single aspect of what it means to be a good listener on the physical level, on the emotional level, on the cultural level, this is one amazing read. First, I want you to tell us what Kiku means. And then I want to go on to tell people first of all, how it is that you got into understanding the science behind it, obviously studying the social linguistics aspect of it, but something happened in your life that changed your life and your hearing forever. So first tell us, what is Kiku?
So Kiku just means listen in Japanese, except that we have two different characters. You know, we write with ideograms. And the great thing about ideograms is that they tell you a little secret about the way people thought about words in Japan, like 2,000 years ago. And you can just tell by reading the characters. It's like a little etymology lesson right there in the characters. So listen has two different kinds of characters. One is written as a gate and an ear in the middle, as if somebody's listening for information from the outside. I think that's the way we normally think about listening. We gain information by listening. And then there's another character that's also pronounced Kiku, but it has an ear on one side, and on the other side it has the number 10, the number 4, and the word for heart. So if you add them all up, you get 14 hearts, and I call this listening with 14 hearts. And that's the kind of listening we do all the time, but we don't always recognize that we're doing it. A lot of times we're hoping for it, and it doesn't happen, and we get the listening for information, but not the listening for the relationship. So anytime anybody's saying anything, they're always saying something that has meaning in the words, but also sends a message about something in the relationship as well.
Yes.
So something personal, maybe something emotional is in the message that somebody is saying. And we tend not to pay attention to that side of listening.
Yes. I just have been so interested in the whole concept of that. But your book takes it to almost every level, and then a million more that you haven't even thought of yet. Kiku, the Japanese art of good listening. You have really all the 14 arts in there, the many ways of listening. But something happened to you when you were a mother of young children that did change the course of hearing. And I'm wondering if that had an impact then on what you decided to do with all of this in this book.
Yes, it really did, because I'm a sociolinguist, and I was always interested in communication, and I was interested in listening too. And I discovered from my cross-cultural research that I did earlier on in my career that there were listening cultures. There were cultures that kind of privileged listening, and then there were cultures that privileged talking and speaking. You might guess which ones enter your mind when you think of those different cultures. So I had always been interested in listening, but then, as you said, when I had small children, I had an accident and ended up in a London hospital, in the ICU of a London hospital, and ended up losing some of my listening and some of my speech from my jaw that became unbuckled because I fell off a scooter, and it pierced the side of my head, pierced through my eardrum and part of my brain. And so, and in the process in the surgery that followed, there was an intubation, and in that intubation, they ended up puncturing a lung, which kept me in the hospital for a whole month. And so during that time, I had a lot of time to listen, and I discovered then that listening wasn't just about relaying information, that it was really about relational health, and that relational health came around and actually fed back into physical health, and that in order to get better and get out of the hospital, I needed not just myself, but all those people around me that were kind of supporting me in their listening. So that's when I kind of began to think about listening in all its different dimensions and its different channels, and thought about listening for relational health and listening for information as being different kinds of listening that we practice every day.
Yes. And so to this day, do you have loss of hearing?
So I have some loss of hearing, and I have a hearing aid in one ear, in my left ear. So I can't hear what linguists like to call sibilants, like the s and the soft sounds and the higher pitches. So I have some hearing loss, and I also have tinnitus. But my right ear is okay, and it's not complete listening loss. And so I have that loss, but I also gained a lot of sort of excitement about learning about listening, and so I feel, in a strange way, privileged by that accident, by having had that accident.
That's having an amazing attitude towards life. Obviously, the way you see it, more full than not. So, Dr. Haru, you have written this book, and it starts with telling all of that, and then you go through all of the various cultural nuances of communication, and even the physical things that happen within your ear. I mean, that in itself is a whole book.
It's wondrous, isn't it? Yes,
it's wondrous, and I had no idea. Would you like to touch on one or two that especially intrigue you and get you excited?
I think I'll talk about one that I haven't talked about much, which is soft listening. So we listen, I think, primarily to learn, and we're very schooled up in learning information, and we get it at home. We start at home, and then we get it in school, and get it at work, and we know how to listen for information. But with the softer part of listening, when you listen for someone's voice and you listen for the nuances in the way they move or the way they touch you or the way, all those are, for me, I take listening kind of very broadly, and I include those in listening. And I think those are really important in contributing to what people feel like when they're heard. So there's always that famous example, or somebody, when I talk to people, they'll say, I was talking to my husband the other day, and I accused him of not listening, and then he came back and cited verbatim what I just said. And so obviously they had heard all the words, but the speaker still felt unheard. Why is that? And I think it's because probably they didn't feel like all the other things were heard that they were saying. And so there's a great gift in being able to soft listen, not just for the speaker, but for the listener themselves as well. So I have a little story that I also haven't told very much, but it was back in the day, my first job in Tucson. I was teaching at the University of Arizona, and it was a long time ago, in the early 90s, when the Soviet Union had just opened up, and all these Russian scholars were going around universities, and one came to our university, and he was a Russian Buddhist scholar. And everybody in our department was saying, he's this amazing scholar, but all he does is he goes through the archives and he's, reading all these Buddhist texts, and he won't come out, and we have to take him to the Grand Canyon because, of course, anybody who lives in Arizona knows that, of course, a visitor has to visit the Grand Canyon, especially if they've never been have visited the United States. So everybody was trying, and they said, "How do we really have to go and read, these Buddhist texts with him?" And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't read any Pali, I can't read any Sanskrit, I don't know ancient Chinese, and even ancient Japanese, I can't read that stuff, so I can't do it. And then I got an email from the department head, and he said, no, I'm sorry, how do you have to go and try and persuade him to come to the Grand Canyon? So one day I actually bumped into him in the library, and he said, okay, you must come into the archives. And I'm sweating, I'm terrified. I go in, I have to read this thing. I don't know how to read this thing. And he sits me down and he begins reading this Buddhist text to me. And I think it was in Sanskrit. And after that, he says, oh, you know, by the way, I learned Japanese over shortwave radio. You're the first Japanese person I have met, and you're the first person who's listened to anything I've read. And he was just smiling from ear to ear as he said this. And it's kind of still one of my sweetest listening memories, just to think that maybe I played a little role in actually, after that, he went up to the Grand Canyon. I didn't get to go, but I kind of imagine him kind of sitting, in the canyon, reading with his hair, long hair pulled back, and just reading his photocopied texts of the Buddhist scriptures that he was poring over when he came. So I think listening is so many things to many people, but the one that we kind of crave for and want the most is that kind of listening. It's just to be heard and just for somebody to witness your being there.
Yes, and not necessarily wanting a response, or a fix-it solution sometimes, but sometimes just the act of being able to share it. What that did for him, not only was there someone understanding what he said for the first time, but how that must have made him, it opened him up to the point where he felt like he could break out of his shell and go see this.
Yeah, that's right. And I think listening does open doors.
What would you say, just since you are Japanese and you've spent so much time in the United States and now in England, what would you say is the difference between kiku, listening in from an American standpoint, and listening from an Eastern standpoint in Japan?
I think the main difference is there's an emphasis for speakers of English to focus on the content. And for speakers of Japanese, it's on the context. So it's everything but the content. So, and that weighs heavily on like what your dad noticed, the speakers themselves. So the person, so it's listening for what they're saying versus listening for everything about the person. So there's this interesting study about eye contact. And sometimes people say Japanese don't practice eye contact at all, and this Canadian study discovered actually they do, but it's so brief that it's just unrecorded. It seems unrecorded. And what they're doing after they make that initial contact is they're looking everywhere else. So Japanese need that kind of bolstering of information to understand the content, and it does matter more than the content itself. So that manifests as very confusing in, for example, business meetings where, Americans would go in and expect answers and decisions to be made in the meeting, and Japanese expect all those answers to kind of happen outside of the meetings, when they go out drinking, when, an after hours engagement, and everywhere else but the actual 1 hour scheduled meeting with the agenda. And it, I think, still frustrates many English speakers as they go in if they're expecting that. But if you understand a little bit about how the culture works, then you can kind of sit back and prepare for it. It probably will feel like it takes longer, but that is the way business is practiced in Japan. So yeah. Listening to and understanding that kind of goes a long way into probably eventually ending up in a collaboration or the desired outcomes that we all want.
Right. That's right. That was his experience for sure. And you said that they only briefly look at the eye contact for Americans. I mean, I think a lot of us try to, we raise our kids to say, when you meet someone, you shake them in the hand and you look them in the eye. And so you're saying that's different there. But there's a place in your book, Kiku, the Japanese Art of Good Listening, where you talk about how when someone even takes a nanosecond to look at somebody, they are already sizing up. They can grasp so much information in just that microsecond, nanosecond of looking at them and looking in their eyes. So maybe for the Japanese culture, are they able to deduce a lot more than they seem to be deducing because they make short eye contact?
I don't think they're sort of, able to understand more by the shorter amount. I think what it is that they need in their idealized outcome of the situation, what they want is more context to come to them before they feel that they can kind of weigh in on what the conversation is about. And because ultimately, one of the cultural ideals in the English-speaking world is speaking. We love our great speakers and sometimes idolize them even. Whereas in Japan, we tend to see really big speakers sometimes as big talkers, and maybe they're over-talking themselves and overselling themselves. So the trust is shifted slightly towards the background and what else can we learn about this person. And that's part of the credibility listening of different cultures, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And this is what your book is so brilliant, because you go through all these various levels and types of listening, and then you give tips on how you can incorporate that. And I think what this is going to do for people who read it, it's going to change the trajectory of people's communication with others. And they'll be having more self-awareness in a good way, not in freaking out because people are, but I think they're going to be able to use so much of what you have in the book to actually improve conversations, improve relationships, improve connections. And I just think it's brilliant. You're getting great reviews. Again, the book is Kiku, The Japanese Art of Good Listening. And Kiku is spelled like it sounds, Kiku. And it's by Dr. Haru Yamada. And I can only tell you that this is it's a book that it is for everybody. It's very deep. You can go as deeply as you like, but you can also get practical tips, as I said. So it's wonderful. It's available wherever fine books are sold. Lots of reviews and high acclaim from people within the academic world, just to everyday people who want to learn about the art of listening. I would love to have you back sometime. It's a fascinating and wonderful discussion. And I thank you for your beautiful work that you've put out into the world.
Oh, thank you, Laura. It was so nice meeting you, and I so enjoyed being here. And I hope everybody can enjoy their listening. That's really the main mission of the book.
The mission of the book is to enjoy listening. And I love that. That's the perfect way to end. Dr. Haru Yamada, the book is Kiku, The Japanese Art of Good Listening. You can find it Amazon or wherever fine books are sold.
You're listening to The Way Home with Laura Smith. Once again, here's Laura.
Well, when this was brought to my attention, I really had to stop and think, is this really true? I had no idea that when you see a dog that, yes, they're beautiful, wonderful, and adorable, pug-like dogs with those little short snouts. And I just thought, well, isn't that funny that they were born that way, and that's just the way that breed is. Little did I know that they are actually bred purposely to have those extreme short noses, snouts, and that it's really actually not comfortable for them, not good for them at all. And I had no idea that we could probably do something about the population of them by stopping to request dogs with this look just for our own enjoyment. Joining me today is Jacob Shaw. He's the manager of strategic initiatives for PETA, which is the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. Jacob, thanks so much for joining me, especially during the holidays when I know a lot of people, including my own daughter, are thinking about getting a dog. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Laura. And yeah, as you mentioned, this is such an important time to be having this conversation with the holidays approaching.
So when did all of this start that someone would even ever request a dog with a short snout? Was it a mistake and then people just thought it was cute? Or how long ago did this all begin?
So this has been happening for decades, but it's really the last few years that we've seen this become a serious crisis. Because as you're mentioning, dogs didn't evolve to have these completely unnatural, smushed in faces with practically no snout. There's really no evolutionary benefit for a dog to have a flat face and no nose. But breeders have intentionally bred these dogs to have deformed features and sold the public on these extreme and cartoonish looks. So when we're talking about breathing impaired dogs, we're referring to French bulldogs, English bulldogs, pugs, Shih Tzus, Boston Terriers, all these flat-faced dogs. And they're now the most popular dogs in the country. French bulldogs have been the most purchased dog for 3 years in a row now. And they spend their entire lives panting, wheezing, and gasping for air. So, we'll talk about, some of the health issues that they suffer from, but there's a really simple solution to help protect these dogs, and that's to stop buying flat-faced dogs.
What are some of, besides not being able to breathe, what are some of the other aspects do they suffer just in general, these types of animals?
So, one of the defining features of pugs, French bulldogs, and English bulldogs is they have these smushed in faces. And in addition to the respiratory issues, it means that their jaws are much smaller than they would otherwise be, but they have the same number of teeth. So they have these really awful, painful dental issues. They have eye issues because their eyes sort of bulge forward out of these flat faces. And they are also susceptible to something called intervertebral disc disease, which is a really painful and debilitating spinal condition. So you see a lot of French bulldogs, particularly as they get older, they'll have wheels, to help roll them because their back legs don't even work anymore, which once again is really just a consequence of the way that they're bred.
So unnatural. I mean, it's very sad. And, and this whole, now, since PETA has been talking about adopt, don't shop for all these years, that you've really been good at getting the message out there. And I think that a lot of people have, started to hear that, but not everybody's ready. They want to have their purebred Doberman or their, the Labradors, the Labradoodles are very popular. Are you seeing an uptick in shelter adopted pets as opposed to going to a full breeder?
Yeah, more people than ever are, realizing that shelters are the way to go, that there are millions and millions of dogs and cats around the country who are in need of a loving home. So absolutely, we're seeing more people than ever adopt. Having said that, we're also seeing more dogs than ever wind up in shelters. And that's in large part because as long as there are people who are buying dogs, breeders will continue to churn out litter after litter of sick, unhealthy dogs, because if there are buyers, they're going to make sure they're there to be the sellers. So the best way that we can help make sure that no more dogs are being bred to be so unhealthy, to end up in shelters, is to commit to never, ever buying a dog from a breeder or a pet store.
I think the messaging is getting out there, but it still happens. They still get away with it. And I just think there needs to be stricter laws in protecting animals, and really getting to make sure that anyone who's breeding these animals, that they're done in safe and clean environments. But I don't know. Do you see there being any improvement on the end of like puppy mills?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the legislative landscape goes, things are certainly moving in the right direction. There's a big push to outlaw the breeding of breathing impaired dogs in the UK. In Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the Netherlands have all banned this practice of intentionally breeding dogs to have these extreme features. And they actually call the practice torture breeding, recognizing how much suffering it inflicts on the dogs. And just last year, Ojai, a city in California, became the first city in the country to pass a companion animal protection ordinance that bans the breeding of French bulldogs, English bulldogs, pugs, and other suffering breeds. I mean, there really is no such thing as a responsible breeder. We have 70 million homeless and unwanted dogs and cats in shelters around the country, and breeders are primarily responsible for driving this overpopulation crisis. They're breeding these quote unquote purebred dogs, which are really just inbred dogs, because what makes them purebred is they're coming from a much, much smaller gene pool, which leads to these lifelong congenital health issues. And then they try to market these dogs as superior merchandise when they're anything but. They're selling people chronically unhealthy dogs, driving them away from the shelters where there are already dogs in need, all so that they can make a profit.
So thank you for all the work that you do with PETA, Jacob. And always, we always want to have you because it's always a discerning and a learning when anyone from PETA comes on, because I just feel like it's just one step towards getting a little bit more humane in the world. So thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you, Laura. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for being such a champion of adoption and kindness to animals. It was really wonderful to chat with you, and I hope you have a happy holiday season.
I thank you, and you as well. Thank you for listening to The Way Home. Each and every one of you are a part of the Way Home family, and we just wish for nothing but great happiness and safety and good health and prosperity, success, everything that you can possibly have to make your life a good one. And we'll see you next time on The Way Home. I'm Laura Smith.
Podcasts by Federated Media.